Hi everybody, Adrian Butera here for The Real Estate Story.
The Real Estate Story with Adrian Butera.
Welcome to episode number 10. I'm excited and delighted to once again have some very special guests in the studio. Thanks for tuning into The Real Estate Story. Joining me here today, I've got Councillor Colleen Gates, Mayor of the City of Hobsons Bay, and Cathy Royal, Senior Property Manager for Compton Green. Welcome, ladies.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, great. Thanks for coming along. Colleen, we're going to start with you. We've got some great things to talk about, and I'm really rapt that you made it into the studio today in our COVID environment.
Thank you. It's great to be here and looking forward to talking rubbish with you.
We are going to talk rubbish. We're literally going to talk rubbish. So I'm pleased to say that Hobsons Bay City Council was one of the first councils in Australia to adopt the 4 bins. Tell us a bit about that.
Thank you, Adrian. I think a lot of people are very aware of some of the issues with exporting of recycling materials to China and other Asian countries, and contamination rates pushback on the contamination rates in recycling, which meant that those countries weren't willing to take our waste anymore. That then had a flow-on effect, I guess, for local recycling processes around their ability to be able to process material to a cleaner stream. And some people would recall the collapse of SKM last year, which sort of...
Who was SKM?
SKM, one of the recycling processes here in Victoria. They had a series of fires prior to their collapse last year, which required EPA involvement, and people may recall, black smoke sort of billowing out across some parts of Melbourne. And that was due to stockpiling, essentially, of baled material, which then caught on fire. So
why would they stockpile? Is that just part of that process?
I think what had happened was when China stopped taking material, the stockpiles or the baled material that had already been processed here had contamination levels that would have been rejected if sent overseas. So those bales were being stockpiled with the intent of reprocessing them again to get them to a cleaner standard in terms of removing contaminants out of the recycling stream. And processing equipment, material recovery facilities have different sorting mechanisms in there to separate plastics from metals, from paper and so forth. And so they have limits on how fast those machines can run. And I think the stockpiles were growing faster than the machinery perhaps was able to process. So that culminated essentially into the SKM collapse, which meant quite a number of councils across Melbourne and across Victoria were then sending recycling material direct to landfill. They had no other choice when EPA closed SKM's gates. So because that had sort of happened on and off a few times, our council, we had just completed the development of a new waste and litter strategy, which the feedback into that strategy from community had shown that there was an interest to do more in that space around reducing waste to landfill and other initiatives around waste and litter. So, and at the time, we'd probably been exploring the idea of maybe doing some trials with food organics. When we got pushed into a situation where the only other option really was to sign up into long-term contracts with one of the existing processors across Melbourne at significant gate fees, we decided that we would move to a 4-bin system sooner rather than later.
Was that a huge decision? I can't imagine. I wasn't at any council meeting. I've only ever been to one, actually 2. But is that a big deal? Was it?
I think it depends on who you ask. It was certainly a rapid decision. So the SKM collapse was around August. We had a council meeting in October, of which I actually wasn't able to attend that meeting, but it was by the October council meeting that there was a resolution of council to move to a 4-bin system. Now, what was happening at the same time was a state government was already undertaking their own reviews, and there was a parliamentary inquiry into waste and recycling, also extending from the same triggers, and recommendations and data that was already come forward to say that glass mixed in with other recyclables is a significant issue, mainly because by the time your recycling bin is emptied into the truck, makes it to the MRF facility, a lot of that glass breaks and it gets embedded into the paper, the cardboard, the plastics.
Yeah, right.
And basically makes those other recycling materials difficult to reuse because of glass shards mixed into the material.
So the beginning of the purple bin.
Yep.
The purple bin got collected at my place this week.
Yes.
Which is the glass bin, and I've got to say, and I've openly and very happily, I'm a big fan of the new recycling, and I think if I can say as a parent with kids at primary school, I've got one that's just started at high school, and one that's about to leave high school not far away, but kids get brought up with, don't bring plastic to school, nude foods, all that sort of lingo and dialogue. You hear it at home. And I don't know about our listeners' kids, but my kids give me a hard time. Dad, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. And you learn quicker than perhaps I would have learnt 20 years ago. It's really top of mind. So when the council brought this upon us, I just thought, well, this is the natural choice. Didn't really know a lot about what was happening at the plants. That really came with later media.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and I've had the opportunity to go and visit APR, Australian Paper Recycling, who are located in Laverton North, and see where our recyclables are being sorted. And they explained, they had bales of material that had come from Hobsons Bay, and saying that they could run their hand over the bale just without wearing gloves, and you wouldn't get cut because the glass is not there, whereas if you went to another recycling facility, you just could not do that because you'd slice your hand open. So
it's a big deal. So for our listeners, Colleen, can you give us a really basic description? What bins do we have? Because this only exists in a few municipalities now in Victoria, and I don't know about the rest of the country, but I think it's quite rare. I'm
not sure about other states, but certainly in Victoria, I'm definitely aware that Macedon Ranges and Moyne Shire have also launched a 4-bin system. They have a glass bin now as well, and I'm pretty sure are using the same recycling processor as us. But so essentially we have 4 bins, your landfill waste, which is now collected fortnightly instead of weekly. Recycling, the yellow recycling, which is also collected fortnightly, that the pickup regime hasn't changed. Food organics and garden organics bin, which has a light green lid, and that's collected weekly now, mainly because of the food components in it. We don't would start to get a little bit funky maybe after a couple of weeks, and then the glass bin, which is collected once every 4 weeks.
Yeah, it's a great system, and I must say the general waste bin, the landfill bin. I'm sure you would have heard around the traps during COVID, a few pressures on that landfill bin during the COVID pandemic, and I guess we're still in it, so I'm not...
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has been really interesting. There's been people sort of all across the spectrum from... I've spoken to people who don't fill their bin, or once a fortnight they still find quite easy. Other people have really struggled in terms of being able to try and squeeze everything into a 120 litre bin. Some interesting statistics, because we had there have been some people who have been asking for the landfill bin to be reinstated to a weekly collection. But then looking at the statistics that we've got so far, and keeping in mind, obviously with coronavirus, more families, more people working from home, staying from home more often than what they would previously. We have 39,000 households in Hobsons Bay, approximately. And when the recycling 2.0 started in February, you were able to opt to moving to a larger 240 litre bin for an extra $90 a year, or $7.50 extra a month. So still collected fortnightly, but double the size. Since coronavirus came on board, the larger bin was opened up to be available at no charge for the next 12 months for families of 4 or more in one household.
Great.
Or for families with 2 children or more in nappies.
Did many take it up?
In total, approximately 2,000.
Okay, fair enough.
And then if you include the ones who had already opted in for a larger bin when we first opened Recycling 2.0, we've got approximately 3,200 households that have taken the larger bin out of 39,000 households. So it's about 8%.
I think that's fantastic. It's a great outcome.
Yeah.
I think a great outcome. Now, I think the Hobsons Bay was first to do this in Victoria.
Yeah, I think Macedon Ranges and Hobsons Bay both started with a glass bin in February, but we went open slather. Everything changed at the start of February in terms of having food organics, the changes to recycling, as well as the glass bin. Macedon Ranges will be rolling out their food organics process over, I think, a couple of years. So yes, the first council to do whole bowls.
I look at my glass bin now and I think that that's a life KPI. When I fill that glass bin once a month, I think I'm drinking too much. I've got to slow down on that. That's not quite right. So it's an interesting to look at that bin. But I feel good. I'm not sure what that is, but I feel good putting glass bins in the glass bottle. I don't feel so good about putting plastics in the plastic and paper container. Bin, I should say.
There's been, I guess, the learning process for households as well around looking at what you're buying. And because our new recycling system started with only being able to take number 1 and number 2 plastics, there's the added challenge of everyone squinting at tiny little triangles on the bottom of containers.
Yes.
But also that people started to take a look at what they were purchasing and what type of plastic they were purchasing items in. Certainly for at home, and my husband is the wonderful person who does the supermarket shopping and has strict instructions that when he's buying things like mustard and mayonnaise and so forth, please don't bring them home in a plastic container. I want a glass one, because for that very reason.
Well
said.
Considered. Well considered, and I think
and driving consumer change.
Of course.
Yeah.
I know that not everybody has loved the change, and council's had a little bit of pushback, but largely been great. But I also have identified that council's adopted changes on how people can store their bins. I know people in unit developments have a different setup, and I've even identified recently, and this is through my own personal experience, we've got a planning application which has been approved to make some changes to our place. Yep. And there was a requirement to have an allocated space for 4 bins. And my architect, a local well-known architect here in the Inner West, said, look, first time I've seen that. And I think it's great that it's being picked up at that very early stages, because the storage of bins, I know from an estate agent's point of view, and I know, Cathy, you'd agree, is one of those additional challenges that we've had in storing the bins. Tell us how you've dealt with units. Can you put some commentary to that?
Sure. And firstly, I'll just say, even for some households, being able to store 4 bins is challenging, and so we've had people contact us asking if we could come back and collect the glass bin because they don't have any glass to put in it.
Really? That's great.
And other people commenting that a 4-weekly collection is not often enough. So again, you have people at both ends of the spectrum. Multi-use developments, the Hobsons Bay started out, I think, with developments of more than 8, working with the body corporate to work out how we could arrange a 4-bin system equivalent so that you don't end up with, my maths is going to be terrible, but we can all imagine the visual of
too many bins.
Far too many bins,
yes,
and it creates a nice rainbow in the back car park, but it's not very useful. So started out with the larger multi-use developments, and then certainly putting the invitation out that if there are other locations that have a smaller number of developments, that our recycling team are really happy to work with body corporates and with people around sharing bins or looking at different options. So
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And how's the council feel on now that you've looked at your 39,000 households, where obviously largely it's been during the pandemic, which has been challenging for everybody for varying reasons. But you look back on it now, would you have done anything differently? How's the council feel about the rollout of the bin system?
For me personally, I think the biggest challenge is still recycling. So, a lot of people are learning, the food organics going into with the green waste has been terrific. The shift of material from what was traditionally in a landfill bin over to a food organics and garden organics bin has been significant. So a 37% drop in landfill waste compared to, say, the same time last year, and
37% drop in landfill alone.
Yeah.
That's outstanding.
And that's just Hobsons Bay.
Yeah.
So if you multiplied that out across every council in Victoria, the amount of landfill waste that you're saving is just huge.
So why is it not a no-brainer? Why isn't everybody just going, bang, okay, 4 bins, more store, one whole bin I've got to store? Why isn't every council just do it?
I think it is a no-brainer, but other councils have different contractual arrangements to us, so they're afforded more time to work through collection schedules and so forth with their residents. We had the consultation as part of the waste and litter strategy, but we were kind of forced into a corner essentially. So I think our residents have done a great job in accommodating and receiving this new waste system, given such the rapid rollout. I think to go back to the recycling component, because we changed from a recycling system that wasn't working anyway, where everyone just throws anything that's plastic into your yellow bin, to then asking people, please just put in the 1s and the 2s. No lids, no hard rubbish, no textiles, none of those other plastics that you're buying. It's been difficult, I guess, to try and educate people about that and why that's so important. And that's still a learning process. We've now been able to add number 5s as well. And the reason for only taking a 1 and a 2 and a 5 plastic is because the processor can actually take those materials and find recipients who will use it as raw material to turn it back into products, and that's all happening here in Victoria. There's no export of those plastics offshore.
Have you been able to keep the recycles within the municipality? I know there's one firm, I think it's Fraser's, that recycle glass. I think they're Laverton. They're within Hobsons Bay. Are we able to keep it local?
They're Laverton North, which is in Wyndham, but
Right, okay.
it's still in the west.
Yeah,
Yep.
we'll take it.
And the same with APR. So they're
Right.
also located in the municipality of Wyndham, but shorter distances as well for travel. The food organics is going to Veolia, who predominantly are based out of Bulla.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
We've got lots of good business and industry here in the Inner West dealing with all that, which is wonderful to see. Colleen, I really appreciate you coming in. I've just got a couple of last questions that I was going to ask at the very beginning, and we got sidetracked on lots of other things. What other issues that you can share with us, a council dealing with? I mean, we know waste is a biggie, and I believe big tick there that we've dealt with that, and it's a cultural shift. And God knows it, during COVID, there's been lots of cultural shifts out there. I've just come from a Zoom meeting, which is now the new normal, and our waste management just seems to be the new normal. But what other challenges exist within council at the moment that you can share?
I think infrastructure is always a big one. We've just released our budget this week, which has a record amount of capital infrastructure that will take place or is proposed for the next 12 months at approximately $68 million, which will be good in a coronavirus environment because that creates jobs and for local people. We've also been a successful recipient of the Working for Victoria program, which will enable us to employ 134 people that we normally would not have been able to put on the books.
Right.
and so the context around infrastructure is both at a state level and a local government level, that we've had a backlog of ageing infrastructure or demands for new.
You're talking sporting buildings, you're talking roads, bridges, what are we talking?
Yeah, sexy things like drainage and roads.
Right.
That we have a bit of catch up to do on some of that infrastructure because it's in poor condition, but also the same for sports pavilions and so forth, and then new infrastructure, parks, playgrounds and so forth, that in the past what we've delivered as a baseline standard has been compared to other municipalities as not really being sort of very exciting. So stepping up the level of those types of infrastructure improvements, and Curlew Community Park in Laverton is a great example where council's delivered something that's pretty swish.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the issues that you asked about, Westgate Tunnel project causes significant amenity issues for people living along the road corridor. Climate change issues and around our coastline, around dealing with storm surges and rising sea level and so forth. And then we have a couple of level crossing removal projects that we're trying to work with state government on to advocate for bigger improvements in those precincts. So.
You're flanked by water and freeways and the level crossing removals. I think there's been an announcement only in the recent week that the Williamstown North residents, or I should say all of Williamstown residents, would seem like they've had a win with it going underground. Is that correct?
From what I see on Facebook, it looks like people are happy with the result.
It would seem like people are happy with the result. So I think I'm happy with the result as well. So look, Colleen, thank you. There's so many issues that we could talk about. There's so many things going on within the municipality, and it's great that you could spare the time, not only as a councillor, you've been councillor for some years, you've been mayor twice. Yes. And I'm delighted that you could pop along here today in our studio. A really hot topic, and I hope others around the country can take this and learn from it. And I think it's been a real success and cultural shift within Hobsons Bay. Colleen Gates, Councillor Gates, thank you for coming along.
Thank you very much, Adrian.
Are you on the move with a smartphone in hand? Go to comptongreen.com.au and our mobile-friendly website will make it easy to find the latest listings for sale and rent in the Inner West.
Well, there we have it. Very insightful insight, a deep dive into the council's changing bins. It's been around now for a little over 6 months. Now it's time for the story of the day. It's always interesting when I try and tie back a story to the topic of the day, and today's topic obviously is the waste. So I thought there's no better story than my two girls, Florence and Pearl, approaching D&I some years ago, and they did a PowerPoint presentation in the lounge room. You wouldn't believe it. They'd put effort, time into this wonderful PowerPoint presentation on why we should buy chickens. So it was a full types of chickens, how you store them, how you feed them. We had the whole gamut. And at the time, just to put it into perspective, my girls at the time would have been 7 and 10, and young enough but driven with passion that we needed to buy chickens. So off we went. The deal was done. Their presentation was beautiful. I don't know where they get their salespeople skills from, but Dee and I couldn't say no. And we started with 6 chickens, and my girls might correct me there. It might not have been 6. We now have 10. The council does allow 10 without a permit within Hobsons Bay. We've got 10 chickens at our place now. We've got a wonderful enclosure, and I can say whilst we've had some challenges with foxes, currently the place is fox-proof. We do see a couple every now and again, but our chickens directly deal with our food waste, our food leftovers, anything that doesn't get eaten the second time round. If it's in the fridge at seconds and it doesn't get eaten, it gets disposed of with the chickens. There's 1 or 2 items that they don't eat, but really they do eat everything. And to us, it's a great way to recycle. To us, it's a great way to get rid of food waste. And you know what? Our chickens are great pets to our girls. They've been great to have at home and a great part of our family. That's the real estate story.
Have you used the Keep Me Posted button on our website? Just click Keep Me Posted and fill in your requirements and you'll automatically receive all our up-to-date listings as they appear.
Well, there we have it, coming to an end. But before we go, I've got our special guest in the studio, Cathy Royal, Senior Property Manager at Compton Green. Welcome, Cathy.
Thanks, Adrian.
Now, like always, when I draw upon the team at Compton Green to come along, there's always some nerves. Now, are those nerves gone now?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Feeling great?
Easy.
Great.
Feeling good.
Cathy, you're a Senior Property Manager at Compton Green. You've had certainly some challenging times during the COVID virus. Give me a quick insight into some of the challenges over the last 3-4 months.
Yeah, look, it's been certainly an environment that we've never faced before in real estate and property management. The biggest issue was around some tenants that may have taken a pay reduction or have lost their jobs. So we were dealing with coming up with agreements between landlords and tenants on how to move forward, whether it was a reduced rent or some deferral down the track. And then obviously there's some protocol and guidelines around that through the Consumer Affairs Victoria, lodging rent relief grants. Some tenants were eligible for up to $2,000. So
it's been a process, hasn't it? We've had to learn a lot as a business.
we have.
And a credit to you, Gia, Jane, Cindy, whole team, Ali. There's a lot that's been to be learnt, and I can say sincerely, it's a credit to our industry, because there'd be thousands of property managers across the country that have had to fast track some learning on legislation and how to deal with these tenants fairly, and not always not always the same, because different landlords are responding differently, different situation. But it's important we point out that. It's affected about 8% of our whole portfolio, so it's not everybody, but those that it has affected, it's affected in some cases in a big way. So really, really unfortunate. Cathy, give us an insight into some of the areas that you work, and give me an insight. I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell me about the last property you leased.
Our last property leased. I have quite a few that we've got.
The last one you did the deal on. How's this for preparation?
Do you want the address?
Yeah, no, well, give us a suburb.
Oh, okay, Williamstown.
Okay, what was it? 3-bedroom, period home?
No, it was a 3-bedroom, 2 living area, 2 bathroom.
Okay, and what did that rent for?
That one, put me on the spot, that would have been $680.
$680 per week, $680 per week. And give us an insight, what sort of person is renting that type of property?
That's a young family,
right?
So they've got their own business. So, yeah.
Not affected by COVID, I'm presuming?
No.
Good.
No, definitely not.
And tell me, young family, young kids?
Yep.
Bit of land on this place?
Yes, yeah, good sized backyard.
Yeah, great.
Got dogs and...
Why Williamstown for this family?
I think they, from memory, were further out of Melbourne and wanted to move closer to the city. So
we see a lot of that, don't we? We see a lot of people coming into Williamstown for schools, beaches, parks. There's a lifestyle choice. Again, I say to people often that Williamstown is still one of those places that you feel that absolute comfort walking around the streets. I'm not saying it's perfect, but there's a comfort just going for a run or taking the kids for a walk or just letting the kids come home from school.
great location.
We're not neglecting at all as we come this side of the bridge. We step out of Hobsons Bay, come to Maribyrnong. Of course, you work across our whole portfolio, across the whole business here in the Inner West. What are your dealings been like here in Footscray, Yarraville, Seddon? Can you give me an insight into something that you've rented there?
Yeah, well, we've got a few recently that we've leased in this area
Yep.
as well, but we've also got a few up for lease as well. So
Tell me about something you got up for lease at the moment.
in Footscray.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a few in Footscray. So yeah, they're mainly apartments. We've got a couple of houses. So yeah, so the clientele's a little bit different in the Footscray area as it is to Williamstown.
Tell me about the house. Period homes?
Yes.
Predominantly houses are in Footscray. They're either post-war, 1950s, 60s. Obviously new apartments exist, but a lot of the period homes are early 1900s. Some cases renovated and sadly some cases not.
Yep, no, we've got quite a few. I mean, the renovated ones certainly snap up, and earned amount, but obviously at the moment it's a little bit different to normal times.
Little quieter at the moment. Still little quieter at the moment,
Yeah,
but
it's a
still
little
renting
quieter,
them,
but
not at the same
and also
pace.
COVID as well.
Yeah. I think we get reminded at the moment, and we can blame COVID for everything, but we are in the middle of winter.
Yep.
Winter is not the peak season for
No.
renting properties. The peak season sort of flanks the new year, doesn't it? November, December,
Yeah,
January, February, peak season.
Springtime, people are more interested in moving.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to get an insight, Cathy. You're new to our team. How long have you been with us?
9 months.
9 months. Feels like it's been years.
It does feel like it, in a good way.
In a good way. That's the right answer. So thank you. In a good way, of course.
Yes.
Great. Cathy, Colleen, thank you so much for both of you joining us. The Real Estate Story. It's been an absolute delight to have you both here. We look forward to all our listeners joining us next week.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
The Real Estate Story brought to you by Compton Green.